Hello, I'm Dr. Ben Newman, and I research coronaviruses for a living. I like them a lot. Okay, so let's answer this question. This is Ask Dr. Ben, where you ask questions, and eventually I get around to answering them. So, yeah, better late than never. This is a good one, though. So, this is from Sue, and hello, thank you. Yeah. So the question is, I would like to ask Dr. Ben his thoughts on whether the coronavirus will stay dormant in our bodies and perhaps reappear again many years later. Thinking like, yeah, chickenpox slash shingles. Yeah, exactly. Great question. And yeah, the answer is we don't know, maybe. So let's get into it. Yeah. Okay, so with chickenpox, it's a different kind of virus. It's actually a herpes virus. There are these things that are called pox viruses, which are related to smallpox, and the chickenpox virus is not one of those. Anyway, so this virus is made of DNA, and DNA viruses, at least the conventional wisdom in the laboratory is that DNA is a little sturdier when it's double-stranded, although double-stranded RNA is actually quite strong. So I don't know that it's a real distinction. But yeah, this will get into some nerve cells, and it'll live in what they call a ganglion, like a bundle of nerve cell bodies. And yeah, once it gets there, it'll hang out there, and as long as those nerves survive, which you hope is forever, right? The virus will be there, and so it'll eventually then come back out. Because if a virus is there, it's always copying itself at least a little bit, and eventually those copies will break free. And so, yeah, it's just like a lifelong game of whack-a-mole, and eventually, I don't know that the viruses win, but eventually you run out of coins to keep playing. Um, so that's what happens with chickenpox virus, which is varicella zoster virus, and turning into shingles later, which is just the reemergence of this thing which has been living in your spine for a long, long time, or in your nerve bundles. Yeah. Now, can coronavirus do this? Well, it can do some of that. So I believe the current best estimate is that somewhere between 1 and 10% of people have a much longer term case of COVID than you would expect from the general numbers. And it appears to be just random whether you have this. There are some of these pre-existing factors, and having enough of those, and they're the same ones that determine whether you'll have severe COVID. So things like being overweight, diabetes, cancer, having autoimmune problems, those will also predispose a person to having longer COVID, which usually means longer COVID infection. That's actually quite common, that you'll think the virus is gone, but it's still in there somewhere, replicating away, and yeah. The virus doesn't have a good way to stay around unless it's copying itself, as far as we are aware. Why might this be? Well, so the virus will copy itself, and it makes a little sort of pocket inside the cell. It'll take parts of your membranes and make a little house for itself. It's very nice, and it builds a little door to the house out of some special proteins. The door looks kind of like a crown with 6 little prongs coming out of it. And that's the way in. So the virus will copy itself inside, and then it'll send out the new copies to the outside to get packaged up and make brand new little virus particles that can then go off and do bad things. In some people, this seems to last longer. Now, that's the bad side of it. The potentially good side of it is that, as far as I am aware, there is not a really strong case for the virus persisting in long-lived cells. So the virus will persist, we think, in the lung and possibly in the intestine. But those are cells that do not last very long. You shed them and you renew them. So you're constantly building more cells there, particularly in the gut. It's like a conveyor belt. You have these, what they call basal cells on the bottom. They're the ones that divide, and then they just keep pushing up copies of themselves that go up, 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 and then eventually get sort of sloughed off or pulled off and, yeah, disappear. So as long as the virus is just in these short-lived cells, it's just sort of hopping around, and it is just like whack-a-mole. Only it's a much longer game than you or I would ever want to play in an arcade. The virus is just bouncing around and not in there. If we were to ever notice the virus getting into nerve cells tend to last a lot longer, at least the big ones. And you kind of know this because, you may wake up with aches and pains, but your arms probably still work. And for the most part, your brain still works. And a lot of those are essentially particular cell circuits with individual cells that last much longer than the average for other cell types in the body. So, yeah, the virus can persist. No, it doesn't seem to be in cells that would last for years and years. And so probably right now it's looking like the virus can hang around, but this game does have an end point at some point. And you will knock out this virus, or the virus will run out of cells to infect, and probably it'll be okay. Now, yeah, who knows exactly what the future brings, and coronaviruses are tricky little devils, but I think it's a good question, and I think it's a thing that scientists are watching for. And if and when this changes, if we notice that something different is happening, which would lead to the virus hanging around for longer, this can only be a bad thing, because the most likely origin of the Omicron variant is from lots and lots of immune selection in a person. And the only way you can undergo lots and lots of immune selection, is to be in a person for a long time. So if we get to a situation where the virus is persisting in people, we would expect to see over time some of these highly evolved variants which have capabilities to escape from some of the more basic components of the immune system. And stuff like that is probably bad news, because it would mean that the virus would be able to break through pre-existing immunity. So we're not seeing much of that yet. Omicron happened, but it's only happened the one time. And there have been plenty of other viruses out there that were highly divergent, and they do not seem to have made a dent in the virus gene pool. So overall, I'm somewhat optimistic. The vaccines and existing immunity from infection have driven the original version of the virus to extinction, like everything up through Delta, Lambda, Kappa, Mu variants. Yeah, those are all extinct now. Everything that's going around is Omicron-like, and they're not accumulating a lot of mutations around those sites that would give them resistance. If anything, they seem to be losing some of those mutations on some of the branches. So I think there is a real chance that if we hit the vaccination pretty hard against Omicron, the virus may not be able to escape that. We may have got it trapped and bottlenecked. That is always certainly the hope, right? But right now it appears to be the best explanation that we've got from the facts in front of us. So, yeah, that's where we are, and hopefully that's where we stay, and hopefully this is looking toward the end of COVID, because I'm looking forward to that too. Believe it. Yeah. So there you go. This has been an Ask Dr. Ben, and yeah, really nice question. Thank you very much for sending that in. All right.